We are with the Wise Sage Project for the Science of Mind Archives and Library Foundation. And today we have a wonderful minister by the name of Dr. Candice Becket. She is presently the minister in Ukiah, is that correct?
Yes.
California. And I want her to tell you about her life and how she found Science of Mind.
Because the reason I am in religious science is because of my family. And my sister and I were baptized Catholic. My mom was just not happy and found what was at that time the Redondo Beach Church of Religious Science. And that is still there, the Center for Spiritual Living in Redondo Beach. Probably a year old when my mom just was finished with the Catholic Church. And my dad was a kind enough man that he understood that. I was an infant, so I've always been in religious science. The minister who was there at the time was the founding minister of the Redondo Beach Center, and his name was Earl Barnum. And I have this great story because when I was probably 3 or 4, and we were meeting in a Masonic temple, and it was to get to the actual temple part of it where the Masons have their meetings. You had to go up a flight of stairs, and it was a curved flight of stairs. And one day I just decided I only ever saw adults go up there, and so I kind of know where I had it in my head I was not allowed to go up there, and so of course I decided to go up there. And I got to the top of the stairs, and there's these big double doors going in to the room. And I looked, and there was only one man who at this point I know was Dr. Barnum. And he was like illumined, and maybe it was spotlights, I don't know, but I really thought I was looking into the face of God. And I guess I was, because we're all God. So is Dr. Barnum. And one of the other people that was also raised in Redondo Beach was Dr. Maxine Kay. And so Maxine loves to tell that story about me. And so that was my start. And some of the things that, you have to remember is, that would have been 1952. So, I was a year old in 1952. So as I grew up in that, people all the time say, oh, how lucky you were. And it's like, yeah, except for if it's all you know, it's just what you know. And one of the great things about being raised in a religious science environment is that you are actually, it's more than just encouraged or welcomed. They really want you to go out and seek your truth, your path. And so I felt really good about that. And in the meantime, I have to tell you a little bit about my father, the Catholic. My dad also really wanted us to have strong spiritual roots. He was a really good Catholic. And I would be in the car and he'd go, I got to go by the church for a minute. And he would go in to light a candle or to do confession or something like that. Or I would see him praying at home, and he kneeled and he used a rosary. So I would ask him things like, so what's up with those candles? And I remember this so clearly because I had gone in and my place was in the very last pew, and I would sit there and then my dad would go and do whatever he was going to do. So I was probably 8, maybe 9 years old, and I asked him, what's up with those candles? And what he told me was that he had a friend who needed to be lifted up. And because he knew our terminology, he said needs to be lifted up in consciousness. And at 8, I wasn't even sure what that meant. But he said, what I'm here to do is to know the highest and best about him and give it over to God. And I was like, okay, that makes sense to me. And he goes, and we're just about out. And he goes, but you know what the best part is? And I was like, what's that? And he goes, I'm not the only one who knows this, because anybody who walks in here today and sees that lit candle also knows the truth for him. So it's just like, that was great. And confession. It's like, what's confession? What's that about? And he said that for them, he goes, you know how you guys kind of go to practitioners? He goes, well, I go to my priest. And I tell him what's bothering me. And then he takes it as like the representative of God. And so what I'm doing is I'm completely releasing it. Now it is God's. And so he would do things like that and connect it. It's, so I grew up thinking that religious science and Catholicism were just like this. I mean, I was well into my teens before I realized that what my dad was talking about, not all Catholics talked that way. So again, just a lot of support about being on a spiritual path from my family. My mother at the Redondo Beach Center was one of the leaders of the youth church, and back in the day that was a pretty big order. And at some point Dr. Barnum left, and I mean we had broken ground where our center is now, and had actually done the first big building, and Dr. Barnum left, and Frank and Anita Richelieu arrived. But I started teaching Sunday school. I started helping in Sunday school with really young, with preschoolers. I was probably like 9 years old when I was first asked, could you come and help these women? And it was an Easter Sunday, and there was, I don't know, felt like 100 babies. And there was, and there was like 2 women. And so they had brought in 3 or 4 girls just to play with the kids. And I was hooked. I loved it. So I assisted in classes until I was 14, and I was assisting in a preschool kindergarten class, which was 4 and 5-year-olds, and the average attendance in that class was around 20 kids on a Sunday. So there was the teacher and there was me, and the teacher was moving on actually to go into ministry, and they were trying to find someone to replace her, and she told the person that was running the youth church, which just happened to be my mother at the time, that she thought that I could do it. And my mom was really reluctant because I was only 14. And I know rules have changed a lot since then, but that became my class. And I had a 12-year-old assisting me in that class. And so I started teaching the science of mind at a very young age. And I just thought something else, though. I mean, we were still at the Masonic Temple, and because I had started to say something about, how lucky you are to be raised in this. And it's like, yeah, we were really lucky. But I also want to just, validate the fact that in the 50s, this was a really young movement. And so a lot of the teachers I had, and I was in grammar school, basically, were well-intentioned, Lutheran and Methodists and Catholics who had found religious science. So as a child, we had things like attendance awards, and I remember one of my attendance awards was a glow-in-the-dark cross. And we say, we had to memorize, well, we didn't have to, but one of our projects one year was to memorize the books of the Bible. And you got a prize if you could do it. I did it. And again, I was, under 10. And they would talk to us about, they would talk to us as best they could in terms of what they were starting to understand as adults about God is all there is, and it's part of you, and you're in it all the time. I remember hearing that a lot. But then we would sing Jesus Loves Me, This I Know, as one of our hymns in youth church. So it was a really interesting time of transition, the 50s and into the 60s, of I think just as a teaching, us finding ourselves. And I was, I was a child and then a teenager. And so I kind of was growing up with it. And then I have this mystical Catholic for a father. And so it was a really interesting time, but I'm not sure that it made my life any easier. It just gave me different tools. And I just, I loved growing up, and I liked going. I mean, I had a lot of friends that just didn't want to go to their Sunday schools wherever they were. And I never understood that because I just had a blast, And we did a nativity scene every year for Christmas. And I remember being an angel and then being this and then and eventually I got to be Mary, and it was a really big deal. And it was a fairly traditionally told nativity scene. And it wasn't until much later that I started hearing stories more as teaching stories. And I remember that a lot of what we were taught was Bible-based, but instead of, having this, they were told more like morality stories and mythical stories. But for years, that's what we got, which may be why I have such a fond, actually more than that, I just love the Bible on so many levels. And it's, if I was on a deserted island, first of all, I don't believe that you can only take one book. I figure you have to take at least 100, but the Bible would definitely be one of them, be right next to the Science of Mind textbook. So I just, I guess that's growing up. And I think that for me, then when I hit my teens, I also always have to say this. So that whole split thing, I was 3. I had nothing to do about it. So I don't have any stories about it. People ask me all the time, "Oh, you were there." I was 3,
Right.
I don't. The only story I do have is when I was about, I don't know, after I was 3, so 4 or 5, again, in the hallway, Masonic Temple, and I heard some adults talking about United, because we were IARSC, we were the International Association of Religious Science Churches, which then became Religious Science International, then became ICSL, and now just CSL. I remember as a child hearing that there were these United people, and I remember that they were somehow not okay. And again, this is a very young child's mind. So I had it in my mind that anybody who'd go to one of and I didn't even know what that meant, a United Church, was like an evil twin. And we weren't to discuss them. And I didn't really know anything about them, so I didn't discuss them. But when skipping forward, I'll come back to that story in a minute. But now I'll go to my teen years, because as a teen, I did the youth seminars, and that's when I really started waking up to who I was as a creative being, who I was as a spiritual being. And one of the best things about going to youth camp for me during my time as a teenager was meeting, I don't even know how many ministers, because back in the day, a minister would come just for a day and give a talk, but then we would be able to interface with them. And there were ministers that came for the whole week. And so I was able, the first time I ever heard Tom Costa speak was at a youth camp. And the first time I heard, everybody came, but they a lot of times they just were there for the day. But like Laura Holman came, and it's like all these people that I kept hearing about that I knew were somewhere in the world at centers, but would never have had the opportunity, or at least not at that age. And then people that came for the whole time, like Leo Fishbeck or Elizabeth Marshall. And so in some ways, these ministers that were willing to come and be there, really, I think were my earliest teachers that were really kind of modeling for me what to do, or how to embrace the science of mind as a practice. And so that was an amazingly important time for me. And that continues to be important. I still work. I mean, I'm 60, almost 68 years old. I still go to teen camp. I'm taking my grandchildren to teen camp so that they can perhaps also, I mean, I don't expect any of them to be ministers. None of my children are. I don't expect any of my grandchildren to be, but who knows?
So about when did you decide that you wanted to be a practitioner and then a minister? At what point was that?
Well, I'll tell you, there's actually two. The first one is, that woman when I was 14 who wanted me to take the preschool kindergarten class. Mm-hmm. She told my mother that I was going to be a minister, and that, that she just knew that about me. And I didn't know that until after I became a minister. I went to Elizabeth Marshall's, as a matter of fact. It was her ordination ceremony. And I was lucky enough to attend, and I had this really big, touch to my heart that was what I was going to do, that was the direction. And I didn't even know really, I mean, intellectually, I don't think I thought I had a different path. I mean, all of us have a lot of things that we get to choose from. And ministry was kind of not exactly in my radar until that event. And then I suddenly realized it could be me. I was in college and I started taking, science of mind classes. So, and I realized that this was my path, that this is what I wanted to do. And my biggest supporter was my father, who was paying for all those classes for me. And at a pretty early point. So I got my first practitioner's license in 1976. So I was 25 years old. And I entered into ministerial training. My principal teacher was Frank Richelieu. But there were lots of others. He brought in many others to expand on our education and our knowledge. So, but I owe so much to the Richelieus. I mean, Anita Richelieu taught me how to do treatment when I was like 12 years old. So it's like, yeah. And I just love them both so deeply. So after finishing ministerial, again, it was in the day, it was a little different than it is now. You didn't, the letter of call was not, that was not terminology that we even had. But you did have to have an actual center in order to be licensed. So I didn't have a center, but I took over running the youth department at the Redondo Beach Church, which now that would be a minister's position, but back then it wasn't. But it was a paid position in which I really got my feet wet. I was running a youth department that was larger than most centers. We had several hundred children on a weekend, and so it was a great place to start. But after, I don't know, I was there 2 or 3 years, and my then husband and I were both interested in doing ministry. So we moved to Escondido, California. And we're going to, and started a group there. But again, you know, you had to have 50 people to go. We did not. We had like 15, and there was a United Church there. So one of my first actual crossovers was starting to embrace that center as, you know, kind of in partnership. But really early on in our stay there, I realized I was pregnant with my third child. So it was really better for us that, you know, doing that I kind of had to step away. So we actually stepped into that center for a while, and it was wonderful. But then in 1981, my daughter was born in September of 1980, and in early 81, I was offered my first pulpit in a small center in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. So we immigrated to Canada, and we're there for, I don't know, 2.5, 3 years. My leaving Calgary was really difficult, but I guess what I can say was I recognized that where I was in my personal journey was not, I felt a little hypocritical getting up and telling people how wonderful and perfect their lives could be, and my life was not. So, so I chose to return to California. My whole family went back, but within a year, my husband and I were divorcing. So I kind of hung out and worked in the, you know, in corporate America. And so it was, and again, it was a learning experience. It was an amazing time for me. It was a scary time for me because, you know, for a while I wasn't sure. And I always felt like ministry was supposed to be my life. And I wasn't sure what was going to happen. But and it was, you know, this is like a 4 or 5 year period of time. But during that time, I met the man who I'm married to now, and we've been married 29 years, so long time. And we decided to move to Northern California. And we had been here not quite a year when I was offered the church in Ukiah. And
so you've been there a long time.
And I've been here 29 years.
Wow. Yeah.
So I obviously really loved it. But I will tell you, there was this funny, because your question actually started with, when did you decide or think about it? And when I came to Ukiah, it was my first Asilomar, I think, maybe the second. And I was talking to people, and they were talking about hearing the call. When did you get the call? And somebody asked me, and and it was this really senior, amazing minister I really looked up to. And she turns and she said, "So when did you get the call?" And really spontaneously, what flew out of my mouth was, "When did I get it, or when did I stop ignoring it?" Mm. And I think I stopped ignoring it, you know, a couple of times, but, you know, life happens and things. Mm-hmm. So I think one of the blessings of my life, which I hope I can deliver to kids and adults alike, is, you know, a stumbling block is not a stop. It's just get back up and do it again and again and again.
So what other positions have you held as far as the organization is concerned? I know you've always been involved with the youth, and what else have you been involved with as far as the whole organization? That would be Religious Science International, and then Centers for Spiritual Living.
Yeah. Okay. Well, with Religious Science International, I was asked to join the board of directors as, well, I actually, you know, back in a different system, had been asked to run the entire youth thing, so not just teens, but being responsible for curriculum for all ages and so helping out with youth churches that were just getting started and things like that, all the way through high school. And we even at that point were still working with young adults as part of the youth department. And so I became the head of that department, and then they decided to make that department part of the board of directors. So they asked me if I would take a position as the board of directors, and I said, sure, I'd do that. And I think my actual answer is like, is it fun? Because if it's not fun, I'm not interested. And they assured me it was fun. It had its moments. Let me just say that. It was not. It was okay. And and I probably should have researched this, but I didn't. At some point, so this is early 2000s, maybe 2003, 2004, something like that. It was becoming really obvious, I think, for everybody. Again, I wasn't quite as clear about who these United people were as I probably should have been. But I know that United was going through a huge, logistical change on how they wanted to be in the world. And we were sort of mirroring that, but we were about a year behind. And suddenly it was becoming really obvious, even to people who didn't want to pay any attention. Like, I was really all about you, so I wasn't really caring what the rest of the organization was doing. And then suddenly it was like, no, this organization is important, and the direction we're going is important. So I'm on the board, but I'd only been on the board a year. And there was a real need, and I appreciated that need, that some stuff really needed to happen, which included a change in leadership. And I won't go into the whole story, but, walking into the room the day that our leadership changed dramatically, I was walking into that room totally satisfied with my position and willing to support whoever stepped up. And it ended up being me stepping up. So I became the president of RSI, which meant I had to give up my youth thing and give it. But there were some really wonderful people on the board that were totally, in fact, people who had run youth camp before me, like Andrea Azevedo, was on the board at the time. So I just kind of went, I guess you get youth, She's like, yay! So it worked out fine. Youth was great. And so I was in the president's position for 4 years, and we were starting the visioning bridge process with United and getting to know each other, which brings me back to my evil twin. First time I met Kathy Hearn, I went, oh, my evil twin, and had to tell her the story. So we still refer to that occasionally, but I love her, and oh my gosh, as far as I'm concerned, United could not have picked a better spiritual leader for that time. Kathy had clarity and vision, and she was also, she'd been in the position for a year, and I'm brand new as the president. She helped me so much to get clear about what I needed to do and how I needed to stand and where I needed to show up and to give my heart a voice in the movement. So Kathy Hearn is definitely on my top teacher list. I mean, she's, oh gosh. And I still love her too. So I'm sure you've interviewed her already. So yeah. And after 4 years, again, in my personal life, I saw a big change coming. So and Ken Gordon at that point was the first vice president of Religious Science International. And we had talked about was going to be a day when he was going to have to step up. And so I remember talking to him about it, and he was like, well, he was very, very ready. And so it ended up, I stayed on the board because that the youth position was open. And so I said, I'll take that. I'll do that. So I stayed on the board. And then Ken asked me to, as the visioning bridge was going away, and the new design team was being put together, Ken asked me to be a part of that. So so I guess you can blame me for the new organization because I was there. But what I say is, like, as a team, it was an amazing time, and we only had, because we really felt like there was this mandate from the two organizations to get our act together and become one. And if it, I could name every single person on that committee and go, oh, and they did this. But Steve Burton and Steve Gabrielson were so instrumental in helping us kind of reverse engineer. Like, we've got 2 years to make this happen. So what needs to happen backwards? And so where do we need to be right now? And kind of put us on a schedule and held our feet to the fire. Mm-hmm. And but we also was like, this is more than just coming up with best practices. This is, who do we want to be? So I get it. We maybe were a little pie in the sky, and things haven't gone exactly the way we dreamt them to be. But, the main thing was to become a single organization, after more than 50 years of not looking at each other.
What do you see as the future of Science of Mind and New Thought now?
I really, I am one of the practicing religious scientists who really wants to let this be by the grace of God. So I don't have, I love it. Again, Kathy, we want to reach 100 million people, and I love that vision. I think that's amazing. But I also love the fact that Dr. Holmes said, when asked what was the future of religious science, he said there would always be a religious science, but he didn't know if it would be called that or if it would look anything like it looked whenever he was asked that question. And so I kind of tend to feel more like that. I think the science of mind is here to stay. And it's being called a million different things. And we make reference to, if you like Oprah, if you like Deepak Chopra, if you like, you'll love us. And so I don't know if everybody's suddenly going to jump on the science of mind wagon, and that we'll have this major movement in the world.
Well, I really appreciate the time that you've spent with us. And I was wondering if in closing, if you have a few words of wisdom that you would like to ensure are recorded as the legacy you leave to the world.
The legacy I leave to the world?
Absolutely.
I was just asked recently, my mother passed away just in June, so a couple of months ago. And after, kind of moving through that and arranging for her services and things, so, we talked about her legacy and did she intend to do what she did? And we all kind of realized that no, she just was who she was, but I was asked if I wanted something said at my memorial service, what would it be? What kind of things would I? And honestly, the only thing I want is that I did my best. I put my heart and my soul into everything I do, from raising my children to being a minister to working within this organization and without. But I think if I think one of the things that I want people to remember is there's an art form in Japan where if a pot is cracked or broken, they fill the crack with precious metal, usually gold or silver. And so it actually kind of says this was broken, and yet here it is, this amazingly beautiful thing that is actually more valuable than it was before it cracked. And I think that's what I want people to know is, you know, we have great tools, but sometimes we crack. And what you do is then you use your tools and you fill yourself as best you can. And what is the product of that is more valuable than what you were before.
Hello, I'm Marilyn Leo, founder of the Science of Mind Archives and Library Foundation. I hope you have enjoyed this wonderful interview with this very special wise sage person. They've been around for quite a while. If you value these interviews, we invite you to show your generosity by making a donation or joining as a member of the Science of Mind Archives and Library Foundation. Thank you for watching.